Let's get some broader analysis and bring in Charles Esdale, Professor of History at the University of Liverpool. Good evening, sir. Napoleon Bonaparte, to celebrate or to castigate? Where do you stand?
It's not the job of a historian either to celebrate or to castigate. It's the job of a historian to pass judgment. And the judgment that can be passed on Napoleon can be interpreted in a number of different ways. Napoleon's contribution in France, his contribution to, for example, the lycée system, was very important. Beyond the borders of France, one has to say that his impact was far more negative. The Napoleonic Wars were not the product of some conspiracy against Napoleon, some conspiracy against the revolution. Modern research on international relations has suggested very much that actually the powers of Europe would very willingly, for the most part, have lived with Napoleon, would have accepted him on the throne of France. Admittedly, the British would have gritted their teeth at that, but the British on their own would have been helpless. They needed the support of the Eastern powers, and the Eastern powers were prepared to live with Napoleon. So you have a series of terrible wars which caused perhaps 5 million casualties across Europe, for little purpose, not least because in the end they were unwinnable.
Not so long after France staged and this is sorry, Mr. Esdale, I hope you can still hear us, Professor Esdale there in Liverpool. Napoleon. I think we're having some sound problems connecting with Charles Esdale in Liverpool. I'll try once again with this question. Not that long, Charles. Great. Not that long after the revolution, we see Napoleon being placed as emperor of France. How does that kind of thing happen? What does this say about France then? What does it say about France now, do you think?
What it says about France then was that France had been in a very, very unstable situation during the revolution, and many Frenchmen wanted stability. Napoleon, in fact, did not give them that stability. In the end, he brought invasion and disaster. About France today, well, France is a country with many problems, and maybe France needs something to celebrate. Whether Napoleon should be celebrated is another matter.
Napoleon, known as a military genius, but his one phrase that he's put into modern French, because of him, is because of a big mistake of the battle at the Berezina. So a Berezina in modern French means an absolute mess, basically. Is that the legacy, do you think, that Napoleon will leave ultimately?
That would be putting it too far. Napoleon had many talents as a general. He was brilliant on the man-to-man level. He was brilliant at the operational level. That's what you do when you've decided to invade Italy or wherever. He was terrible on the strategic level. Napoleon, as a strategist, can simply be pulled apart. He didn't understand the need to buttress his victories with political success. And in the end, that was what defeated him. So I don't think that Napoleon can be held up as a beacon for future generals.
Charles Esdale, Professor of History.
Always matters.
Charles Esdale, Professor of History at the University of Liverpool, thank you so very much for joining us and sharing your insight into Napoleon Bonaparte as France is marking the 200th centenary of his death. I'll just say that it strikes me as kind of ironic that we go to my hometown to talk about Napoleon, but Charles Esdale there in my hometown of Liverpool. Thank you again. Next.